I've thought long and hard about how to write a compelling intro to this video, but I'll just go with this. Nudibranchs are cool as f***. I mean, just look at this one. Looks like it's got places to be. Wobbling around like that. The caption was Nudibranchs majestic swimming, but I'll let you be the judge of that. Hey, they even got Pikachu, look at that. Or this one. I know you were probably fooled by this, but this is not actually a cow. Impressive mimicry. There are about 3,000 species of nudibranchs, and the overall body forms vary greatly from one species to another. It's almost like they have all the outfits you could imagine. And don't even get me started on the defense mechanisms that nudibranchs have evolved. Some of them can digest venomous animals and then use the stinging cells for their own defense, basically stealing biological weapons from jellyfish. And somehow, nudibranchs figured out how to move these cells through their digestive tract without having them fire into themselves. But we'll get to that in a second. Anyways, this video is just me talking about why nudibranchs are cool as f***. Nudibranchs belong to the class of gastropoda, you know, snails and stuff. And they are commonly divided into two kinds, the dorid and the elid nudibranchs. The elids are covered in these floppy things called cerata. These are important for breathing, and they are also part of their digestive system, because why not? The dorids are a lot more slug-like and have this little fuzzy thing on their back called a branchial plume, which they use for breathing. They also have a mantle, which kinda looks like a stylish poncho, and some species can use it to swim. Remember this one? On the head of all sea slugs you can find a pair of sensory tentacles, and I know this might be devastating news, but these are not their ears. They're more like outward-facing nostrils that detect smell and taste. These so-called rhinophores are essential because their eyes kind of suck. Their eyes sit at the base of their rhinophores and they are really small. 1/4 of a millimeter kind of small. They cannot form images or see colors, and they're only used as basic light sensors. You've probably noticed that nudibranchs don't have a shell, even though they belong to the group of mollusks. One might say they're kind of nudie. They do actually have a shell in their larval form, but they lose it upon metamorphosis into the adult, but more on that later. No shell, however, doesn't mean no defense. I know they just look like defenseless, colorful blobs, but they do have a few tricks up their sleeve. Or up their mantle, I guess, I don't know. The first and probably most obvious are their bright and contrasting color patterns. We can see this especially well on this stylish gentleman. Chromodoris quadricolor, what an epic name. With their coloring, they are very visible in their environment, but it makes them look not so yummy for predators. This kind of coloring is a form of aposematism. This basically means advertising to predators that you are not worth attacking or eating. And there's countless examples of this in nature. I mean, that just doesn't look tasty, does it? But nudibranchs have evolved some way cooler shit than that. Cnidarians, like jellyfish, possess stinging cells which contain venomous organelles known as nematocysts. Here's how a nematocyst actually works, because it's a pretty amazing design. Inside each cell is a coiled, hollow thread under enormous osmotic pressure, like a loaded spring. When something triggers it, pressure, chemicals, whatever, it fires that thread outward in about 700 nanoseconds. That is one of the fastest cellular events in all of biology. It punches through the prey and delivers venom directly, basically tiny biological harpoons. The jellyfish is essentially covered in millions of these tiny pressure-loaded syringes, and it has no say in the matter, they just fire when triggered. And here comes the cool part. Some nudibranchs that feed on these venomous animals can absorb and store these stinging cells in their cerata and then use it for their own defense. To protect themselves from the nematocysts firing in their own digestive tracts, elid nudibranchs have a hard cuticle lining their esophagus and a mucus that chemically inhibits nematocyst discharge. The nudibranch then carefully shuttles these loaded weapons through its own body, intact without setting them off, and deposits them at the tips of its cerata, where they sit, still functional, ready to fire into anything that bothers them. God damn. This stylish slug is a beautiful example of this. They're a species of elid nudibranchs, and they feed on hydrozoans that have these stinging cells and then transport them to the tips of their cerata. Stinging cells are not even the only type of cells that they can absorb and use for themselves. This little feller is a sacoglossan, and they are one of the few animals capable of photosynthesis. They are not actually true nudibranchs and only distantly related, but who cares. Chloroplasts, the structure inside plant cells that actually do the photosynthesis, cannot normally survive outside of a plant cell for very long. They rely on the plant's own DNA to keep functioning. They are not supposed to be self-sufficient. A chloroplast ripped out of an algae cell should just stop working and fall apart within days. To which the Sacoglossan replied, I don't know. They eat algae, strip out the chloroplasts, and keep them alive and operational inside their own body, producing energy through sunlight. This way they can survive for months only on the photosynthetic products that they produce through these cells. And upon making this video, there's still no definite answer to exactly how some of these species are able to do this. But undeniably, they can produce energy through these cells. Or like Bill Wirtz put it, they can taste the sun. But back to the nudibranchs. I'd like to take a quick moment to go over some spectacular ones. This one has a massive, expandable hood instead of a normal mouth that it uses to trap prey like a gnat. According to jellybiologist.com, they also smell like watermelon. I just thought you should know that. Chromodorus wallani are electric blue with black and white edges. In this position, they kind of look like an elderly person bending over to inspect something. This one mimics a soft coral so well that they're very hard to see. A nudibranch that looks like the thing it lives on and eats. Very committed to the bit. I don't really know what to say about this one, just look at it. Outrageously decorative for an animal that lives on the seafloor. This one's also known as the sea bunny for apparent reasons, and I think it went viral a few years ago just because, you know, it looks like a bunny. Once again though, these are not their ears, sad news, I know. Nudibranchs are all carnivorous without exception, feeding on things like sponges, hydrozoans, and some of them even eat other nudibranchs. That feels personal, I don't know. They have many different hunting techniques and some of them are fascinating to watch. Here you can see a rainbow nudibranch approaching an anemone. And... not sure who's eating who on this one. Another absolute savage is the blue sea dragon, Glaucus atlanticus. Not only do they look like legendary Pokemon, they also float upside down on the water surface because they are a little confused. They swallow a bubble of air and store it in their stomach, and since the bubble is now on the underside of their body, they sort of just flip over. In this position, the blue side of their bodies faces upwards, blending in with the blue of the water. The silver-grey dorsal side faces downwards, blending in with the sunlight when viewed from below the surface of the water. This is a great camouflage, and this sort of coloring is called counter shading. You can also see it in sharks, for example. Now, what are they doing floating upside down on the water surface? Well, firstly, looking pretty fantastic, and secondly, eating the Portuguese man-o-war and other venomous siphonophores apparently. Getting eaten by an upside down Pokemon with an air bubble attached to its stomach just floating towards you is a different level of disrespect, I have to say. Glaucus atlanticus even absorbs the stinging cells like some of the other species we talked about and use them for their own defense. Just that these stinging cells don't end up on their backs but spread out at their sides. Now I know that after all of this you probably want to go out and find a nudibranch for yourself, just like I did. So where do they actually hang out? Basically every ocean on Earth, from tropical coral reefs to waters around Antarctica. They tend to prefer shallow coastal waters because that's where their food is, but some species have been found at depths over 2000 meters. Since all of this wasn't strange enough, they also decided to go for a rather strange reproductive cycle. Nudibranchs have a set of reproductive organs for both sexes. This is called being hermaphroditic, and I'm jealous. Also, no, they cannot fertilize themselves, you naughty bastards. Their genitals are located at the right side of their body, so the reproduction act is an awkward sort of head-to-tail kind of action and it lasts a few minutes. In this time, they both fertilize their partner and get fertilized. So at the end of it, they're both pregnant. If that's not romantic, I don't know what is. After this, they deposit their eggs in a gelatinous spiral, and these can be as little as 1 or 2 eggs or as much as 2.5 million depending on the species. Their microscopic eggs hatch into free-swimming larvae. At this stage, they're entirely different from the adults. Most importantly, they still have a protective shell, and a ciliated organ called a velum for swimming. The velum is basically a ring of tiny beating hairs that the larva use to spin itself through the water. It feeds on small organisms like algae or plankton and grows until it's ready for greatness. This larval phase can last anywhere from a few days to several weeks depending on the species and water conditions. The mortality rate is brutal though. Most of those millions of eggs don't make it. When they have found a perfect spot for metamorphosis, they begin transitioning into the adult nudibranch. They lose their shells and everything that made them look like a conventional mollusk just gets discarded. At this point, they start becoming cool as fuck, basically. The adult nudibranchs are mostly somewhere between 2 to 5 centimeters in size, but there's some exceptions like the Spanish dancer that can get up to 50 centimeters. They usually live for less than a year, so yeah. To summarize all of this, nudibranchs are shellless sea slugs that steal weapons from jellyfish, absorb solar panels from algae, all the while looking fancy as hell. Evolution was clearly having fun with this one. And so was I, actually. This was a fun video to make. These things are actually pretty cool. So yeah, if you're interested in more videos, subscribe to the channel or whatever. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.